Hi, I want to talk to you for a little bit about how the body uses negative feedback loops to maintain homeostasis. So, a negative feedback loop is a regulatory mechanism in which changes in conditions trigger an automatic response that will restore homeostasis. So, the body negates the change, the move away from homeostasis to restore homeostasis. That's why it's called a negative feedback loop. And this is much the way a thermostat in a house or a room will sense temperature change and negate that change and return the room temperature to normal, which we'll call the set point. The set point is the term used in science for whatever that target homeostatic point is. So let's look at this image here of a house's thermostat to understand negative feedback loops and how they're drawn a little bit more clearly. So as you can see, the set point for this room is 20 degrees Celsius. That's normal homeostasis for this room. That's about 68 degrees Fahrenheit. So as you can see, there are really two different loops here. One upper loop for when the temperature goes up and moves set point too high, and one lower one for when temperature falls and moves the set point too low, because there will be two different responses, one for when temperature goes up, one for when temperature goes down. If temperature falls below set point, so 19 degrees Celsius, 18 degrees Celsius, that thermostat will sense that change and respond by turning the heater on. That's an automatic change that will help restore homeostasis. The room temperature will increase back to 20 degrees Celsius. However, as you can imagine, with the heater staying on, it may well exceed 20 degrees Celsius. So after some amount of time, the thermostat will then read too hot. We'll go up to 21, 22 degrees Celsius, and that thermostat will sense that change and turn the heater off. So room temperature decreases back to 20 degrees Celsius. So both responses negate the change, but in different ways. And in order to maintain that set point of 20 degrees Celsius, this feedback loop is constantly moving back and forth between turning the heater on when the temperature falls too low and turning the heater off when the temperature reads too high, in order to maintain that set point temperature around 20 degrees Celsius. Okay, so now that you understand how to read this kind of negative feedback loop, and that you set the set point in the middle, and then you have two different loops, one for when you move up too high, one for when you move too low, then we'll start applying that knowledge to glucose homeostasis. So glucose homeostasis in the body is maintained primarily by the pancreas and the hormones that it makes. So the pancreas is one of our endocrine glands. An endocrine gland is a gland in the body that makes hormones. And hormones are chemical messengers that are released into the bloodstream and travel around the body through the blood, causing cellular changes in other locations. Humans have many endocrine glands. We have a thyroid gland in our neck. We have a pituitary gland in our brain. We have ovaries and testes, which maintain reproductive functioning by making our sexual hormones. And we have the pancreas here, which is the one we'll talk about. It lies behind the stomach on the left side of the abdomen, and it makes two hormones, insulin and glucagon, which we'll talk more about. And another primary organ of glucose homeostasis, which you'll learn about, is the liver. So the liver is an interesting organ. It's underappreciated. It's the largest internal organ, and it lies right under mostly your right lung, although you can see it extends into the left side as well. mostly under your right lung and your right side of your upper abdomen. Okay, so let's talk about how these organs work together here. All right, so here is another negative feedback loop, this one for blood glucose homeostasis with the two loops as part of it. So normal blood glucose level is our set point. You don't need to know the numbers, but that's the point the pancreas is trying to maintain all the time. So if blood glucose level goes up, it will trigger the events of this upper loop. Goes down, will trigger the events of the lower loop. So what can cause a rising blood glucose level? Well, basically eating food that contains carbohydrates, which are digested down to their glucose monomers in the small intestine, and then those glucose monomers are absorbed into the bloodstream. So that blood containing high levels of glucose will then travel, and capillaries, our tiniest blood vessels containing those high levels of glucose, will travel through the pancreas. The pancreas will detect that change and release a hormone called insulin. The insulin secreting cells of the pancreas will release insulin, a hormone, into the bloodstream. Insulin will then travel from the pancreas all around the body, and it will only affect three primary cell types: muscle, fat, and liver. So different things happen here. So muscle cells will then be triggered to take up glucose and use it to do work or store it in long chains called glycogen. You remember glycogen is the form of, it's a carbohydrate made by animals to store glucose monomers. It's a compact form of storage that animals use to store excess glucose. Fat cells will also take up glucose and convert it to triglycerides in a complex set of chemical reactions that I'm not going to go into, but I do want you to know that insulin will trigger the creation of fat as another way to store excess glucose. It's not a dehydration synthesis reaction, it's a complex reaction. Whereas when muscle cells make glycogen, that is a dehydration synthesis reaction. Okay, and the third cell type that insulin affects is liver cells. Liver cells also will take up glucose and store it in a dehydration synthesis reaction as glycogen. This removal of glucose from the blood by muscle, fat, and liver cells will cause blood glucose levels to decline back to the set point. And then the pancreas no longer detects high blood glucose levels and stops secreting insulin. We have achieved the set point. However, if that person doesn't eat food or for a few hours or exercises and uses a lot of that blood glucose to do work, then blood glucose levels will fall. Low blood glucose levels will cause the pancreas to release a different hormone. It will detect that low blood glucose and release a hormone called glucagon. Glucagon hormone travels to the liver, its primary target organ, and causes the liver to break down glycogen in a degradation hydrolysis reaction and release those glucose monomers into the blood, causing blood glucose levels to rise back to the set point. When that happens, the pancreas detects that change, that blood glucose levels have been reestablished at the set point, and stops producing glucagon. So that's how low blood glucose is handled with a hormone called glucagon. And as you can imagine, since we are constantly changing our blood glucose by eating food, not eating food, and exercising, This is a constantly functioning negative feedback loop where insulin and glucagon are constantly being released to bring blood glucose levels back to normal. Okay, now you can look at the rest of the slideshow and do the work you need to do.